Today we will continue the short story, The Most Dangerous Game, written by Richard Connell, and we will begin on page 57. An abrupt sound startled him. Off to the right he heard it, and his ears, expert in such matters, could not be mistaken. Again he heard the sound, and again. Somewhere off in the blackness someone had fired a gun 3 times. Rainsford sprang up and moved quickly to the rail, mystified. He strained his eyes in the direction from which the reports had come, but it was like trying to see through a blanket. He leaped upon the rail and balanced himself there to get greater elevation. His pipe, striking a rope, was knocked from his mouth. He lunged for it. A short, hoarse cry came from his lips as he realized he had reached too far and had lost his balance. The cry was pinched off short as the blood-warm waters of the Caribbean Sea closed over his head. He struggled up to the surface and tried to cry out, but the wash from the speeding yacht slapped him in the face, and the salt water in his open mouth made him gag and strangle. Desperately, he struck out with strong strokes after the receding lights of the yacht, but he stopped before he had swum 50 feet. A certain cool-headedness had come to him. It was not the first time he had been in a tight place. There was a chance that his cries could be heard by someone aboard the yacht, but that chance was slender and grew more slender as the yacht raced on. He wrestled himself out of his clothes and shouted with all his power. The lights of the yacht became faint and ever-vanishing fireflies, then that were blotted out entirely by the night. Rainsford remembered the shots. They had come from the right, and doggedly he swam in that direction, swimming with slow, deliberate strokes, conserving his strength. For a seemingly endless time he fought the sea. He began to count his strokes. He could do possibly 100 more, and then Rainsford heard a sound. It came out of the darkness, a high, screaming sound, the sound of an animal in an extremity of anguish and terror. He did not recognize the animal that made the sound. He did not try to. With fresh vitality, he swam toward the sound. He heard it again. Then it was cut short by another noise, crisp, staccato. "Pistol shot," muttered Rainsford, swimming on. 10 minutes of determined effort brought another sound to his ears, the most welcome he had ever heard, the muttering and growling of the sea breaking on a rocky shore. He was almost on the rocks before he saw them. On a night less calm, he would have been shattered against them. With his remaining strength, he dragged himself from the swirling waters. Jagged crags appeared to jut up into the opaqueness. He forced himself upward, hand over hand. Gasping, his hands raw, he reached a flat place at the top. Dense jungle came down to the very edge of the cliffs. What perils that tangle of trees and underbrush might hold for him did not concern Rainsford just then. All he knew was that he was safe from his enemy, the sea, and that utter weariness was on him. He flung himself down at the jungle edge and tumbled headlong into the deepest sleep of his life. When he opened his eyes, he knew from the position of the sun that it was late in the afternoon. Sleep had given him new vigor. A sharp hunger was picking at him. He looked about him almost cheerfully. Where there are pistol shots, there are men. And where there are men, there's food, he thought. But what kind of men, he wondered, in so forbidding a place? An unbroken front of snarled and ragged jungle fringed the shore. He saw no sign of a trail through the closely knit web of weeds and trees. It was easier to go along the shore, and Rainsford floundered along by the water. Not far from where he had landed, he stopped. Some wounded thing By the evidence, a large animal had thrashed about in the underbrush. The jungle weeds were crushed down, and the moss was lacerated. One patch of weeds was stained crimson. A small glittering object not far away caught Rainsford's eye, and he picked it up. It was an empty cartridge. "A 22, he remarked. "That's odd. It must have been a fairly large animal, too. The hunter had his nerve with him to tackle it with a light gun. It's clear that the brute put up a fight. I suppose the first 3 shots I heard was when the hunter flushed his quarry and wounded it. The last shot was when he trailed it here and finished it." He examined the ground closely and found what he had hoped to find: the print of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction he had been going. Eagerly he hurried along, now slipping on a rotten log or a loose stone, but making headway. Night was beginning to settle down on the island. Bleak darkness was blacking out the sea and jungle when Rainsford sighted the lights. He came upon them as he turned a crook in the coastline, and his first thought was that he had come upon a village, for there were many lights. But as he forged along, he saw to his great astonishment that all the lights were in one enormous building, a lofty structure with pointed towers plunging upward into the gloom. His eyes made out the shadowy outlines of a palatial chateau. It was set on a high bluff, and on 3 sides of its cliffs dived down to where the sea licked greedy lips in the shadows. Mirage, he thought Rainsford. But it was no mirage, he found, when he opened the tall spiked iron gate. The stone steps were real enough. The massive door with a leering gargoyle for a knocker was real enough. Yet about it all hung an air of unreality. He lifted the knocker, and it creaked up stiffly, as if it had never before been used. He let it fall, and it startled him with its booming loudness. He thought he heard steps within. The door remained closed. Again Rainsford lifted the heavy knocker and let it fall. The door opened then, opened as suddenly as if it were on a spring, and Rainsford stood blinking in the river of glaring gold light that poured out. The first thing Rainsford's eyes discerned was the largest man Rainsford had ever seen. A gigantic creature, solidly made and black-bearded to the waist. In his hand, the man held a long-barreled revolver, and he was pointing it straight at Rainsford's heart. Out of the snarl of beard, 2 small eyes regarded Rainsford. "Don't be alarmed," said Rainsford with a smile which he hoped was disarming. "I'm no robber. I fell off a yacht. My name is Sanger Rainsford of New York City." The menacing look in the eyes did not change. The revolver pointed as rigidly as if the giant were a statue. He gave no sign that he understood Rainsford's words, or that he had even heard them. He was dressed in uniform, a black uniform trimmed with gray astrakhan. "I'm Sanger Rainsford of New York," Rainsford began again. "I fell off a yacht. I am hungry." The man's only answer was to raise with his thumb the hammer of his revolver. Then Rainsford saw the man's free hand go to his forehead in a military salute, and he saw him click his heels together and stand at attention. Another man was coming down the broad marble steps, an erect, slender man in evening clothes. He advanced to Rainsford and held out his hand. In a cultivated voice marked by a slight accent that gave it added precision and deliberateness, he said, It is a very great pleasure and honor to welcome Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to my home. Automatically, Rainsford shook the man's hand. I've read your book about hunting snow leopards in Tibet, you see, explained the man. I am General Zaroff. Rainsford's first impression was that the man was singularly handsome. His second was that there was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man past middle age, for his hair was a vivid white, but his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare, dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Turning to the giant in uniform, the general made a sign. The giant put away his pistol, saluted, withdrew. Ivan is an incredibly strong fellow, remarked the general, but he has the misfortune to be deaf and dumb. A simple fellow, but I'm afraid, like all his race, a bit of a savage. Is he Russian? He is a Cossack, said the general, and his smile showed red lips and pointed teeth. So am I. Come, he said. We shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later. Now you want clothes, food, rest. You shall have them. This is a most restful spot. Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved, but gave forth no sound. Follow Ivan, if you please, Mr. Rainsford, said the general. I was about to have my dinner when you came. I'll wait for you. You'll find that my clothes will fit you, I think. It was to a huge beam-ceilinged bedroom with a canopy bed big enough for 6 men that Rainsford followed the solid giant. Ivan laid out an evening suit, and Rainsford, as he put it on, noticed that it came from a London tailor, who ordinarily cut and sewed for none below the rank of duke. The dining room to which Ivan conducted him was in many ways remarkable. Here was a medieval magnificence about it. It suggested a baronial hall of feudal times with its oaken panels, its high ceiling, its vast refectory table, where 20 men could sit down to eat. About the hall were the mounted heads of many animals, lions, tigers, elephants, moose, bears, larger or more perfect specimens Rainsford had ever seen. At the great table, the general was sitting alone. You'll have a cocktail, Mr. Rainsford, he suggested. The cocktail was surpassingly good, and Rainsford noted the table appointments were of the finest, the linen, the crystal, the silver, the china. They were eating borscht, the rich red soup with whipped cream so dear to Russian palates. Half apologetically, General Zaroff said, "We do our best to preserve the amenities of civilization here. Please forgive any lapses. We are well off the beaten track, you know. Do you think the champagne has suffered from its long ocean trip?" "Not in the least," declared Rainsford. He was finding the general a most thoughtful and affable host, a true cosmopolite. But there was one small trait uncomfortable. Whenever he looked up from his plate, he found the general studying him, appraising him narrowly. "Perhaps," said General Zaroff, "you were surprised that I recognized your name. You see, I read all books on hunting, published in English, French, and Russian. I have but one passion in my life, Mr. Rainsford, and it is the hunt. You have some wonderful heads here, said Rainsford, as he ate a particularly well-cooked filet mignon. That Cape buffalo is the largest I ever saw. Oh, that fellow? Yes, he was a monster. Did he charge you? Hurled me against a tree, said the general. Fractured my skull, but I got the brute. I've always thought, said Rainsford, that the Cape buffalo is the most dangerous of all big game. For a moment, the general did not reply. He was smiling, his curious red lips smiled. Then he said slowly, No, you were wrong, sir. The Cape buffalo is not the most dangerous big game. He sipped his wine. Here in my preserve on this island, he said in the same slow tone, I hunt more dangerous game. Rainsford expressed his surprise. Is there big game on this island? The general nodded. The biggest. Really? Oh, it isn't here naturally, of course. I have to stock the island. Okay, let's go back to page 57. He has had to swim from the time he fell off the yacht until he got on land. Okay, he had a very hard time. I want you to think of the conflicts that he has started to face already. All right, and then we learned that when he finally reaches the edge of the jungle, he falls into the deepest sleep of his life. All right, on page 58, when he opens his eyes, he realizes that the pistol shots that he had heard also means that there are men. And where there are men, there must be food. And at this point, he is starving, okay? He saw no sign of a trail through the weeds, but he could see that the weeds had been trampled through, all right? And all of a sudden, when he looks down, he sees that the weeds are stained crimson, which is red, which means blood. And then he finds a cartridge from a .22 pistol, okay? So he examines the ground closely, and he finds what he hopes to find, the prints of hunting boots. They pointed along the cliff in the direction that he had been going. So he follows the footprints of the hunting boots, and then all of a sudden, he looks and he sees many, many lights. And of course, he thinks he has come upon a village of some sort, when all of a sudden he realizes that all of these lights are coming from one building, which is a huge palatial chateau. And at first he thought this was a mirage that he was seeing, that it wasn't real, until he reaches the front door and he realizes the door is real, the door knocker that is shaped like a gargoyle is real. So he lifts the door knocker and he lets it fall, and he's shocked at how loud it was. Finally, a gigantic man appears at the door, and he has a long black beard that goes all the way to his waist, and he's holding a long barrel revolver, which is a gun. Immediately, Rainsford tells him not to be alarmed. He's not a robber, that he fell off a yacht. And he tells him, my name is Sanger Rainsford, and I'm from New York City. But this giant of a man just keeps staring at him with the revolver pointed at his heart. And again, Rainsford repeats his name to him. And again, he tells him, I fell off a yacht. And he tells him, I'm hungry. The man's only answer was to raise with his thumb the hammer of the revolver. Okay? All of a sudden, Rainsford sees the man's hand go to his forehead while he gives him a military salute and clicks his heels together, which you should know that Russian soldiers That's how they salute. Okay. Then Rainsford notices another man coming down the marble steps of the stairway. He's a slender man dressed in evening clothes. And he goes to Rainsford and holds out his hands. And he says, "It is a great pleasure and honor to have Mr. Sanger Rainsford, the celebrated hunter, to his home." He knows who Sanger Rainsford is. And automatically at this point, Rainsford shook the man's hand. The man goes on to explain that he had read his book about when Rainsford hunted snow leopards in Tibet. And he tells him his name is General Zaroff. Rainsford's first impression is that the man was handsome. And he goes on to give his description. I want you to pay close attention to the description. You're going to see several strange things, or you should. And he explains, General Zaroff explains to Rainsford that Ivan is an incredibly strong fellow, but he has the misfortune of being deaf and dumb. He cannot hear and he cannot speak. But he also adds at the end that he is a bit of a savage. Okay? Rainsford asked him, is he a Russian? And he says he is a Cossack. You can see that a Cossack is a member of the people that live in South Russia, and many of them served as fierce cavalrymen or soldiers under the Russian czars. So at this point, General Zaroff tells him that he was about to have dinner, but he will wait for Rainsford to join him. And if he will follow Ivan, Ivan will give him a change of clothing. So he goes to this huge bedroom, and the first thing he notices, besides the bedroom being so extravagant, is that the clothes that Ivan gave him are made by a tailor from London that only sews for people that are above the rank of dukes, which means aristocratic families. Then when he reaches the dining room, he notices how magnificent it is with its high ceiling. It has the crystal, china, silver. And he also notices in the hallway there are large mounted heads of many animals such as lions, tigers, elephants. Okay? So then they sit down to eat, and he explains what they eat. The borscht, which is the rich red soup with whipped cream. This soup is made out of beets. I forget the Arabic name for it. Anyhow, they have dinner, and he serves him the finest champagne. And he asks, do you think the champagne has suffered from its long ocean trip? Rainsford tells him not in the least. And then Rainsford noticed something very strange. Even though he finds the general very welcoming, very friendly, very hospitable, every time he looks up, he notices that the general is staring at him in a strange way. Perhaps, the general says, you were surprised that I recognized your name. And he goes on to tell him that he reads all hunting books that have been published in English, French, and Russian. And he tells him, I only have one passion in life, and that is the hunt. So Rainsford tells him, you have some wonderful heads here. That Cape buffalo is the largest I've ever seen. He says, General Zaroff says, yes, he was a monster. So Rainsford asked, did he attack him? He said, yes, he hurled me against the tree, fractured my skull, but I got the brute, meaning he killed the brute. Rainsford says, I've always thought that Cape buffalo is the most dangerous of all big game. And the general tells him, no, you are wrong, sir. The Cape buffalo is not the most dangerous game. I hunt. Here in my preserve on the island, I hunt more dangerous game. So Rainsford is very surprised by this. Remember, they're on an island. And Rainsford says, is there a big game on this island? The general said, yes, the biggest. Really? And at this point, the general says, oh, it isn't here naturally, of course. I have to stalk the island. So this concludes part 2 of The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell. Go back and read over it again and make sure you continue filling out your sheets that are in SMS.